Nefer is finally here, and this cat lady is all about destroying her enemies with big lunar bloom damage. However, to achieve the best results, there are some caveats you need to be aware of, which is why in this Nefer's ultimate guide video, I will go through every comp and rank her teammates, explain to you her best artifact and weapon loadouts, and of course, I'll also provide a brief explanation of Nefer's kit and Constellations. Now, keep in mind, this video was made thanks to Creator Experience server, so content shown here is subject to change. In fact, one change from this server compared to global version is that she will have 100 less base elemental mastery, which results in about 5 to 6% less damage when she was previously showcased in other videos. But this guide video takes this into account when calculating rest of her performance. Okay, so in a nutshell, Nefer specializes in dealing damage with her skill, which will cause a ton of lunar bloom damage. Not only that, she also greatly benefits from a second Naughty unit in the team because of her own passive, the Ascendant Gleam buff, and few other crucial buffs, like fully enabling Black Marrow Lantern and Serenade artifacts set from a support. There are some rare exceptions like running Nefer in a Hyper Bloom team, but I'll talk about this later on in the video, and for now, I'll always assume you're playing her with another Naughty unit. But moving over to her kit explanation, many videos, including the one I posted previously, have gone into great detail explaining how she works, so instead, I'll briefly cover her abilities so we can then focus on the rotations, build options, and teams. Although frankly, she's quite simple once you understand the mechanics. Okay, so first of all, when looking at her normal attacks, they are not worth leveling because they deal really low damage and you'll almost never end up using them anyway, unless you accidentally press attack when doing combos. Otherwise, she also has this really weird charge attack called Slither for exploration, but it's about as fast as using regular dash run, so it's like, whatever. Anyway, this brings us to the most important part of the kit, the elemental skill. When tapped, for 9 seconds, Nefer gains resistance to interruption, and she can now unleash up to 3 special charge attacks. Each charge attack will consume 1 Verdant Dew and deal 2 hits of small Dendro damage, followed by 3 big hits of Lunar Bloom. Either way, it's important to note that 90% or so of her total damage output comes from these Lunar Bloom attacks. So yeah, it's all about blooming, baby. Also, the skill actually has 2 charges, so in reality, you can tap the skill, do 3 of those special charge attacks, tap it again, and do 3 more. And when it comes to particle generation, each skill tap provides 2 or 3 particles. So not the best, but it is what it is. Now, the basic way to use these charge attacks would be by just simply holding down the attack button. So tap skill, hold attack button, wait until all 3 of them are unleashed, and then repeat this again with a second skill charge. However, you can also utilize dash cancels. Right after the charge attack animation starts, just press dash and it will actually still deliver all 3 Lunar Bloom hits. Keep in mind though, at least on the creator's server, the second Dendro hit doesn't seem to trigger. Maybe it's due to my ping, but it barely matters because its damage is extremely low and has almost no effect on her overall performance. Still, using these dash cancels leads to 2 big benefits. First of all, the field time becomes much shorter, since it takes about 5 seconds usually to just hold attack to deliver charge attacks, whereas with dash cancels, this becomes about 3.5 to 3 seconds, leading to 1 or 2 seconds shorter duration. And since you repeat this combo again, this in total can save you about 3 to 4 seconds of field time, which actually gives a big boost to Nefer's personal damage, ranging around at least 15% DPS increase compared to just holding the attack button. Now, the other benefit revolves around the burst. You see, normally without dash cancels, her burst, which costs 60 energy, is quite mediocre, if not downright a DPS loss, since it only deals regular Dendro damage, and majority of her teams won't buff it super well. However, thanks to dash cancels, you can use it after first skill tap and 3 charge attacks to then give yourself some more time for Verdant Dews to be generated, because with dash cancels, you can run into this problem where you just use up Verdant Dews too fast, and then you have to wait for them to regen. However, you can also use the burst at the end of Nefer's rotation because her field time was much shorter thanks to dash cancels. And these extra few seconds of its animation can be beneficial because some teammates' skills or bursts could be on cooldown, so instead of just waiting and doing nothing, the burst at least deals some decent damage in the meantime. But yeah, let's quickly take a look at some of her rotations. So the basic rotation without dash cancels simply starts with Nefer after all other teammates buffed her. You tap skill, do 3 charge attacks, tap skill again, and do 3 more charge attacks. This rotation assumes you're just holding the attack button. The next rotation involves using dash cancels after every charge attack, and this time, you can also use the burst at the very end. In fact, you can even animation cancel the special charge attack with the burst, simply interrupt it the same way as you would with the dash cancel, but instead, quickly press burst, and the lunar blooms will still hit the enemy. Finally, this advanced rotation is recommended with teammates and support artifacts that provide very short buff duration. This includes things like Sucrose's EM buff from her passive, Instructor's set, and Serenade's set, if the teammate cannot maintain it with off-field damage. So for example, you press skill, dash cancel all 3 charge attacks, and immediately swap to another teammate such as Aino to refresh Instructor's set, and then swap back to Nefer to unleash the second skill tap and charge attack combo with dash cancels. It's honestly quite simple once you get used to it, and personally, it does feel satisfying once you get a hang of it. Oh, and here's a full team rotation once again, but I want to emphasize that on first rotation, you always want to make sure Dendro and Hydro are set up first before the final support, since when switching to Nefer, you want to have as much Verdant Dew generated, and absorb as many Seeds of Deceit to start off strongest. And then yeah, with some supports like Aino with Instructors or Sucrose with Serenade, I do encourage to swap out from Nefer after first row of charge attacks, to refresh buffs and swap back to her. Alright, the last thing we need to talk about would be the passives. So the third passive states that whenever anybody in the team causes Bloom, instead it now becomes Lunar Bloom Reaction, which as we all know it, it's functionally identical to Bloom, and the only change is that Lunar Blooms generate Verdant Dew resource every 2.5 seconds, which Nefer will heavily rely on. On top of this, the passive also increases Lunar Bloom's base damage by up to 14%, which scales with Nefer's Elemental Mastery, and all you need is 800 of it to max out the buff. Also, as a reminder, the charge attacks that deal Lunar Bloom damage only scale with Elemental Mastery, and you can see other things that benefited from this table, but long story short, EM, Dendro Resistance Shred, critical rate and damage are the only things that matter to Nefer. Damage percent buffs do not increase Lunar Bloom damage, and thus, it's basically useless for her. Now, as for the second passive, simply put, with maximum of 1000 EM, which Nefer can easily achieve in any team, it will make it so that Verdant Dew keeps generating for 3.75 seconds instead of 2.5 seconds, but it still leads to basically the same amount of dews you can generate in most teams due to the speed of the generation. And this passive barely ever matters, besides some scenarios when Hydro doesn't get reapplied fast enough. Lastly, the first passive is where things get interesting. So as long as the team is in Ascendant Gleam state, which as a reminder, this means you have 2 Nauticaria units on the team, then when Nefer uses her skill, all the Dendro cores on the ground become Seeds of Deceit, and for 15 seconds afterwards, any Dendro cores that would be generated are instead generated as Seeds of Deceit, and once Nefer uses her charge attack, she will absorb all nearby Seeds of Deceit and gains 1 stack of Veil of Falsehood, and each stack gives 8% damage increase to her special charge attack, and you can have a total of 3 max stacks, so 24% total. Keep in mind, this is a multiplicative bonus, so it's literally multiplying her damage by 1.24 times, which is a huge improvement, and one of the reasons you really want to play her in Ascendant teams. Oh, and by the way, you can see how many stacks she has by looking at the teams on the right or above her HP bar. Still, these stacks expire after 9 seconds, but can also be refreshed by obtaining more, and from my own experience, they are quite easy to obtain and maintain throughout the whole rotation. Most importantly, as long as Nefer has 3 of these stacks, she also gains 100 extra EM for 8 seconds. Just keep in mind, the burst actually consumes these stacks to moderately improve its damage, but in majority of cases, you can quickly regain these stacks afterwards, even on the first special charge attack. Alright, enough with the kit yapping. Let's move over to her builds and teams. Okay, so first of all, when it comes to talents leveling priority, focus on maxing out the skill talent because this is where literally all of her damage lives. The Lunar Bloom contributes to the majority of her total damage output, and so I also highly recommend crowning it. Then you can level the burst if you're planning on using it with dash cancel combos, or heck, if you just simply want to use it even with basic hold attack combo. Finally, for normal attacks, I really think you shouldn't waste resources on leveling them, they're just not worth it. Also, as a reminder, if anything changes regarding her stats or multipliers on global version, make sure to check out my pinned comment. Anyway, there are many ways that we can optimize Nefer's potential, so let's start by first going through her artifact sets. Currently, her best in slot is going to be Night of the Sky's Unveiling set, and nothing can really beat it in terms of performance. The second best option would be Hunter's set, but this basically requires you to play Farina with a healer, although it's super niche and still lags behind by about 5 to 7%. Then we have Gilded Dreams, but the lack of critical rate she's missing out on from Sky or Hunter's set just sets her back by at least 10 to 12% DPS last loss. But if you don't have her best in slot Sky set, it's fine to be honest, use as a temporary artifact loadout, or you can even just go for a 2-piece 80 elemental mastery set combo. Alright, now let's talk about Nefer's main stats. By far, her best main stats are going to be EM Sands, EM Goblet, and critical rate or damage circlet. If she's using a catalyst with critical rate substat, then typically this means you will want to go for critical damage circlet, and if she's got EM or critical rate damage substat weapon, then usually she will need critical rate circlet. However, there is one exception. If you're playing with Lauma or C2 Nahida, and Nefer is also using her signature weapon, this means she will gain 18% critical rate in total, or 28% if both Lauma and C2 Nahida are in the team. And provided you roll at least 14 critical rate substats, you can then easily go for critical damage circlet, which will result in the best possible potential Nefer can achieve. Now, you could also go with this setup by using elemental mastery circlet, but it would need to have really good critical damage substat rolls shown here. So overall, stick with critical damage circlet. Finally, let's go through substat priority. If you're planning on using dash cancels and burst, then usually about 120% energy is good enough. And with more DENDRO teammates or Favoni's weapons, this requirement becomes even lower. Then just focus on critical rate, critical damage, and elemental mastery. Attack percent or flat attack are basically useless on her. Yes, I'm aware her skill tap and the first 2 DENDRO hits from charge attack, as well as the burst dual scale with attack, but since Lunar Bloom damage only cares about EM and crit stats, yeah, just forget about it. I mean, if the artifact has it, it's not a big deal, but you definitely do not want to land any rolls on it. Look, long story short, the most basic build you can follow if using, let's say, Black Marrow Lantern, or basically any catalyst, would be to just make sure she has EM critical rate or damage main stats, and farm for artifact pieces that contain elemental mastery as well as crit stats. And if you do decide to use her burst, get around 110 to 120% ER. You don't need to use it every rotation, just whenever it's possible. Anyway, last thing I want to go over would be her weapon options. Her signature compared to Black Marrow is about 22% better. However, because it also provides 8% critical rate by default, and when using it together with Lauma with critical damage circlet and enough crit rate rolls, it can become even stronger. Then we have a bunch of 5-star stat sticks, which I won't really cover any of them. You can just look at damage ranking table here. They're all pretty much lagging behind the signature, although one notable exception would be the new 4-star gacha catalyst Dawning Frost, which is available on Nefer's weapon banner. At R1, it's slightly better than Black Marrow, but R5 makes it her second best in slot choice. So if you decide to get her signature, but the gacha gods mess up your luck, but you at least end up with one copy of this weapon, it's really nice, especially if you don't want to bother crafting Black Marrow. Finally, as for the other 4-star options, hands down, Black Marrow Lantern is the best pick here. It'll only cost you some time to farm the materials, but yet again, if you don't want to bother with it, then Battle Pass Sacrificial Jade is alright, even a bit better than Black Marrow at full refinement. However, be careful not to overcap her critical rate. There's also Wit Sith, but as we all know it, it's very random, and its passive will only trigger every other rotation due to the long cooldown. Otherwise, yeah, just pick and choose whichever weapon you own that has the best damage potential shown here, and see if you can build around it with artifacts. Anyway, let's talk about her teams next. So, to keep things interesting, let me start by saying that her best current meta team right now is made up of Lauma, C6 Aino, and either Nahida or Sucrose. And then as for free-to-play comp without Lauma, would be something like Aino, DENDRO teammate, usually Kali or Yao Yao, and then Sucrose. As an alternative, if you want to have sustain on the last support slot, a team of Aino, DENDRO, and Cookie is the next best thing. But regardless, if you don't have Lauma and play Nefer's free-to-play comp, even if you use someone like Nahida in DENDRO slot, you still end up missing out on about 40 to 50% damage that Nefer could otherwise deal with C0 R0 Lauma. Yeah, it's a pretty huge gap, and in order to catch up to it, you would have to have C1 R1 Nefer, but I'll cover this more in her Constellations section. Still, there's a lot of ways how you can approach team compositions with Nefer, even if she really only has one archetype, which is basically going to be Nefer, DENDRO, Hydro, and support. So let's first go through all the DENDRO options if you're playing the free-to-play comp without Lauma. So I'm assuming that Aino is going to be in the Hydro slot to activate the Ascendant Gleam state, and starting with Nahida, she's an okay unit for Nefer at C0. Her R1 signature gives 40 extra elemental mastery, which is fine, and then her burst can provide 250 EM boost. That's basically all her buffing, and usually you'll want Nahida on Deepwood set since she can maintain it very easily. Now, if we talk about C2 Nahida, who provides 10% critical rate and 20% critical damage to Lunar Blooms, well, she ends up about 15 to 20% behind C0 R0 Lauma when Nahida is C2 R1. So the gap isn't as huge, although although keep in mind, I've only done a few field tests with the team shown here, so your mileage may vary. Next we have Baiju, and the best thing about him is the healing and shielding, which helps to avoid some annoying interruptions that can happen in combat. Other than that, he also provides a decent Lunar Bloom damage boost, although keep in mind, his burst does have a long animation, which could negatively impact some of the team's rotations. Then there's Tignati. I know it sounds weird to see him here, but I am more specifically talking about C4 Tignati, which some of you may have it if you lost a lot of 50-50s. His C4 can provide up to 120 EM, and if you also have Elegy for the end, he can give additional 100 EM, although his rotation is a bit long just to get these buffs. Moving over to 4 stars, Yao Yao can be a decent healer option. Nefer's teams definitely have issues with good sustain options, so she's not the worst pick, plus her C1 can sometimes also restore Nefer's stamina, which can be useful when doing dash cancels with her. And then we have Kale. She's a decent Dendro applier and can help with energy. However, her C6 also helps with application even more. And then C4 also can give a nice little boost of 60 EM. I mean, who doesn't like Kale? We must protect her. Finally, there's Dendro Traveler, and honestly, they're like the last option I'd recommend due to the circle impact game you need to play, although they can provide gradually up to 60 EM boost, and you can also slap on them Sapwood Blade, so you can then pick up the leaf for additional 120 EM. As for Kirara, she's just okay. Her shield is fine, but due to support artifacts I'll discuss in a moment, she's just not great. Alright, I think that covers all the logical Dendro candidates if you don't have Lauma. But what if you do have her? Well, let's talk about the Hydro options then. First, we have Aino, and I'll be honest, if you have her at C1, which provides team-wide 80 EM boost, she's already like the best in slot choice. And when she's C6, she is absolutely a must-have in the team because she ends up boosting Nefer's overall damage by about 10% at the minimum. Also, because Aino's cooldowns are very short, she perfectly works with Nefer's advanced rotation, and she can also be equipped with Forest Regalia to give her even more EM boosting. Although some might hate the leaf clunkiness, I definitely sometimes have trouble picking it up, so then Aino with Favonia's sword is great to give the team some much needed energy. Now, the next interesting choice would be Nilo. At C0, all she really does is just provide Hydro application. Although, if you play her strictly in Hydro Dendro team, then at start of rotation she will grant 100 EM boost from her Golden Chalice buff, but it will only happen once because it requires you to get damaged by Dendro, which will happen from instantly exploding blooms. But as you know it, once Nefer uses her skill, those Dendro cores become Seeds of Deceit, and basically for the rest of the fight, no more exploding blooms to damage you. On top of that, several of Lauma's stacks will be wasted on first rotation to boost those bountiful cores, and there will be less Seeds of Deceit for Nefer to absorb on first rotation as well. Still, as a workaround, you could just start the rotation off with Nefer doing a single skill tap, which should resolve all these issues I've mentioned, and then you swap to the rest of the team to set up the buffs as usual. However, if you have Nilo's signature, she can then provide roughly 130 to 150 EM boost, which is pretty decent. But then if you have a C2 Nilo, then she actually becomes really good for Nefer because not only will she shred Dendro resistance, but also her skill's duration will be extended, which is great to maintain a steady income of verdant dues. And check this out. From this anecdotal test I've did, it seems to be that C2 R1 Nilo actually outperforms C6 Aino by about 3 to 4%. But yeah, as for the rest of the Hydro options, well, there's Barbara or Kokomi, who can provide healing for the team. Again, this could be very valuable if you struggle with surviving. Just keep in mind their skill's cooldown is very long, so I do recommend giving them both sacrificial fragments. And then there's Xingqiu. He can also help a little with sustain by providing a bit of healing and damage reduction, and unlike Yolan, who requires Nefer to weave in normal attacks between her charge attacks to land her coordinated Hydro attacks, with Xingqiu it's enough to just use his skill or burst, and the orbital swords around Nefer will keep applying Hydro. It's just that you will have to hug the enemy. Show them some love. Finally, there's Farina, and yet again, just like with Flynn's situation, her burst won't be utilized with Nefer. So all you gotta do is just build her with one of the support sets and utilize her skill to apply Hydro. Overall, there's not much to think about it when it comes to Hydro, and clearly, it's the weakest link here besides Aino, since all of the options offer same amount of supporting capabilities, which are quite limited besides Aino and Nilo with vertical investment. Alright, with Hydro homies out of the way, let's talk about the last slot, the support. And to keep things simple, the best 3 options are going to be Sucrose, Nahida, and Inefa. All of them end up performing on about the same level, with C0 Nahida slightly coming out on the top, but we're talking about maybe at best 1%. And this can still differ depending which enemies you're going up against. But yeah, when it comes to Sucrose, all she does is provide 20% of her EM for the whole team. The rest of her kit won't benefit Nefer. On an interesting note, Sucrose's burst can be useful to do if she's equipped with Serenade's set, since it will linger around for a while and extend the set's buff. So make sure to get as much energy recharge and elemental mastery on her. And finally, there's Nefer. Due to how much Dendro from both Lauma and Nefer gets applied, Nefer's kit won't work that well. So she's a special case where running Nefer with 2 Hydro units such as Ino and Farina can be pretty good. Obviously not on the same level as having Lauma on the team, but Nefer is like the only one where Nefer can stray from the usual archetype. Just keep in mind, the start of rotation requires Nefer to apply some Dendro to get at least one due. And of course, this team is best utilized when Ino is C6. As for the rest of the support options, I would like to give a special shout out to Cookie because in both free-to-play and even Lauma teams, her healing is much appreciated. Plus, it's very easy to maintain either Deepwood or Serenade set on her. And you can also give her Nilo's signature and go for a HP build, so she can then provide some extra elemental mastery boosting. Otherwise, there's Fischl who can provide some additional damage, and same goes for Yai Miko. Just make sure to only use her skill 3 times and swap out. For some sustain options, C6 Diona can give a 200 EM boost, but due to her burst's long cooldown, this might not be the most optimal choice, even if she can heal and shield. Then there's Zhongli who can shred enemies' resistance by 20%, and of course, provides a fat shield to keep Nefer alive. Or you can use Lanyan for shielding, and at C4, she gives 60 EM. Or, as I've mentioned in my previous video, even Chi-Chi with Serenade and Sax Sword can be a decent healer. Also, as someone who still remembers Albedo exists, well, in case some of you forgot, his burst actually provides 125 EM boost, and he will contribute a bit of geo damage from the flower, if it's not destroyed randomly. Some other wacky considerations could be Lila for shielding, or Rosaria to gain that short 12% critical rate boost, and perhaps she can also help with a bit of freezing. Same goes for Escoffier, as scuffed as it sounds, her personal damage and some occasional freeze can be useful. Or, I mean, you can just use any of the Dendro options I've mentioned as a last slot to play triple Dendro teams. I mean, look, aside from Sucrose, Nahida, and Nefer, and Cookie if you need to stay alive, every other support is like whatever. It's just a small bonus here or there, not much optimizing can be done. But yeah, there you have it. All the teammates have been ranked, you can see them here. Overall, I'd say the best approach is by just using one of the 3 best ranked supports. But if you need extra survivability, go for a healer or shielder. And if you don't have Lauma, use Nahida or any Dendro that can provide some kind of buffing. But if you do have Lauma, then C6 Ino and one of the top 3 supports are the best picks. Heck, even C1 Ino is basically already up there as the best pick, aside from C2 R1 Nilo. Now, the last thing I want to go over would be what artifact sets to use on Nefer's teammates. And really, it all boils down to these 3 sets. Deepwood, which is the most critical to have, followed by Silken Moon Serenade, and then you definitely want Instructor set because of that extra 120 EM. To keep things simple, I've made a reference table for you with a good number of team comps shown here, so you can see for yourself which set the characters should use. But overall, the number 1 priority is to make sure you can maintain those buffs constantly, especially when it comes to Instructor set. Its duration is very short and requires the unit to be on field and to trigger a reaction. So right now, Ino or Cookie are very efficient at this, and most importantly, you will need to utilize dash cancels to then quickly swap back to the support with this set and refresh the buff's duration, and swap back to Nefer to do a second row of her charge attacks. But yeah, aside from that, there's also the Hyperbloom archetype, which requires Nefer to be the only Nodcry unit in the team, so she doesn't disable Hyperblooms from triggering the Dendro cores. Honestly, a team of Nahida, Xingqiu, and Cookie is alright, and it can be a decent way to play Nefer if you don't have Lauma. You won't see her deal big numbers of damage, but overall, team DPS will be definitely better than most Hyperbloom variations, especially if you have C2 Nahida. But I would still say playing Lauma with another Nodcry unit helps fully realize her damage potential. Anyway, that's pretty much for the teams. Let's talk about Nefer's Constellations now. Okay, so starting with C1, it's extremely simple, yet very deadly. Her special charge attacks will be boosted by 60% of her elemental mastery, which includes those Veil of Falsehood stacks, boosting it further as well. So now, you can expect her Lunar Blooms to hit at least by about 22% more damage, which is pretty nice. Then there's C2. It first will increase Veil of Falsehood stack duration and raise the stack limit to 5, so that's 16% extra multiplicative boosting, or 40% total, or more or less 1 1.4 times increasing Lunar Bloom damage. On top of this, when you reach 5 Falsehood stacks, she gains additional 100 EM. Oh, and I guess she also now always gains 2 Falsehoods by just tapping skill, to make sure you obtain those 5 stacks same way as you would need 3 stacks. Overall, this constellation benefits both her skill and burst. Obviously, skill benefits a lot more from this, but this is also a nice little boost to the burst if you use it in her rotations. Now, C3 gives the usual plus 3 levels to skill talent, and this of course means better scaling Lunar Bloom from charge attacks, but it's not super huge, like about 7 to 10%. Then C4 is a bit hard to evaluate, and I'm talking about the first part where Verdant Dews are generated 25% faster. Honestly, I would need a lot of time to go through all of the teams, so for now, I'll just say this sounds decent, but maybe it could potentially lead to some smoother dash canceling and forgoing of using burst, but I don't know. Otherwise, 20% Dendro resistance reduction is not bad, but with Lauma and Deepwood, we already get a lot of it, but it doesn't hurt to have more. Now, C5, just forget about it. Minimal damage improvement for the burst. And then C6 finally basically converts the regular Dendro hits from her charge attack into Lunar Bloom. And then she delivers another extra Lunar Bloom hit after the charge attack ends. Not only that, but she gains 15% Lunar Bloom elevation in Ascendant Gleam state, which is basically just multiplying all LB damage by 1.15 times. I mean, at this point, she's just blooming all over everyone, and you're probably receiving calls from your bank about your negative account balance. Overall, when it comes to pull priority, here's a table shown here, which also includes Lauma. I know at the time of this guide, she's not available to pull for, but for those who pulled for Lauma can use her as a reference here, and you can also see if it's worth saving up for her future rerun. Still, as you can see, playing teams without Lauma requires Nefer to be C1R1, which is quite costly of course, and I do want to remind everyone to be mindful of your spending and never put yourself in a bad financial situation. But yeah, that's pretty much her guide. One thing I like to note is that currently, despite Ino being a decent Hydro option, there's a lot of room left for improvement for a future Hydro buffer, if there's ever going to be one. And as for the last support slot, I also feel like with so many lunar reactions benefiting from EM scaling, it's possible we might see a dedicated EM booster in the future. But anyway, leave a comment if you have a question, I'll try and answer it, but I also appreciate it if you could press the like button on this video to help with the algorithm and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching me, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye!